pleasure of introducing Stephen Elder. He is the Director of Systems Engineering for Ergon Refining in Vicksburg, Mississippi. He has a 40-year career in the oil industry and has worked in different aspects of the business from the wellhead to gas pumps. He also works with the Department of Homeland Security and Energy, as well as several intelligence agencies as a subject matter expert in cybersecurity and industrial control systems.
Quick sound check. Can you hear me in the back? Sir, can you hear me? Okay. All right. I'd rather walk around a little bit, and my wife's pet name for me is Foghorn Leghorn. So she says, use your indoor voice, Steve, your indoor voice. I'd rather walk around and pace a little bit rather than be tied up there on the podium. Yeah. And besides, it's awful inconvenient to try to see what you're reading like this. So I'm a little disappointed that I didn't get my main topic title on the card. I thought that was cool. Yeah, The Great Shift Change, or How to Work for Your Grandchildren. What is it? Intergenerational Issues in the Workplace. Sounds like a good engineering society topic. A little bit about myself that she didn't go over. I'm a chemical engineer from Oklahoma State University back when they did not have a decent team back in 19. And then I got a PhD in communications in Louisiana Baptist University, proving that an old dog can learn some new tricks. I came to the realization that you can be really good technically, but if you cannot convey your ideas to other people, you've had it. There's a great rabbit trail about Anthony Quinn for that. Did you know Anthony Quinn used to work as an architect? And yeah, like I said, great story. I won't go into it. We don't have enough time. 40 years in the business. I started out punching holes in the dirt in Oklahoma and Texas, migrated over to refining, and went to work for Ergon for a man named Les Lampton. 30 years with Ergon now. They wondered if I was going to stay. I had moved around a lot. I was what was called a butterfly. And there were serious concerns that I was even going to stay at Ergon very long. As we said, at Ergon, there were a lot of marriages, but very few divorces. And my wife, who's a seventh generation Mississippian, was the tying vote. Mr. Lampton decided to hire me, but he also told me the most dangerous thing in the world is a Yankee with a U-Haul. I am a subject matter expert for some three-letter agencies. I think that's mainly because early on after 9/11, I'd answered the phone when they call. And I just kind of fell into that. So I do a lot of work with those guys, and it gives me some really good perspectives on things, not only geopolitics, but cyber, different things like that. I am an ordained minister, as I like to tell people. I am that whacked out right-wing evangelical Christian your mama warned you about. I also serve as, I call my main job, the executive research editor for the Koinonia Institute. My 30 years at Ergon, I call my tent-making job. And I am a husband, father, grandfather, and great-grandfather. I am now the guy that my great-granddaughter Emerson will look at a picture and say, now, Mom, is that on your side of the family or Dad's side of the family? I am becoming a concept. And I'm a boomer. You can catch me at Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and my email address. I don't even bother with snail mail anymore. All sorts of ways to get in touch with me. I do have some business cards. I will tell you ahead of time that I do have this presentation in a PDF form already up in the cloud, and I'll give you the link at the end. I'm not going to give it to you now, so you can't download it and get ahead of me. We're going to talk a little bit about the different generations in the workplace, what they are, some of their characteristics, some of their traits, and how you can use the different characteristics of those people, those different generations in your workplace to be more dynamic and more effective. This didn't go past legal, but it went past my bride, and this is what she told me to say. She says, Steve, your mileage may vary. The things that you say may not fit into everyone's experience, but this is more my personal experience and a lot of what I've read from some people that are much more smarter than I am and talked with them. I had an aha moment years ago when I read a book called Generations. And it talked about a concept where basically in the United States there are 4 different generations that repeat themselves over time. And these 4 generations will have unique characteristics, but for example, the 5th generation has many of the same characteristics as generation number 1, and 6 with 2, and so forth. And it's predictable. He did a follow-up book called The Fourth Turning, and that was a little bit more political, but it talked about how you have these characteristics, how you go from extreme optimism into some malaise, into some dissatisfaction, into a generation just giving up. Okay, and there's a downward spiral. And the way that spiral is broken, it's broken with a strong man. It can be a great dynamic leader like Teddy Roosevelt, or it could be a leader like Adolf Hitler. It just depends on the situations and circumstances at the time. Another interesting concept in the books, and this is a little bit geopolitical, talks about within a generation, you have cohorts. I'm a boomer. My cousin is a boomer. He is about 10 years older than I am, so he's on the top end of the boomers. I'm toward the middle bottom. 2 completely different attitudes because of our life experiences. Example I love to give is my father was born in 1918, and his little brother was born in 1921. My Uncle Ralph really didn't know the Depression. My father did. He remembers having his mother going to the undertaker to get cardboard shoes that they used to put corpses in because they couldn't afford real shoes, and he couldn't walk to church in the rain because the shoes would fall apart. That was his life. Uncle Ralph had it completely different. And as Uncle Ralph used to say he said, Steve, when I was growing up, Dottie and Dick, my aunt and my dad, Dottie and Dick never let me know there was a depression. And when it was over, they never let me forget it. He's come out with some other books. Strauss and Howe have come out with some other books. Millennials Rising, which is a very good book about characteristics of millennials. And the 13th Generation. It got its title from, since the founding of the country, there have been 13 generations that have cycled through this country. And it talks about the newest one, the millennials, or and also I call it the iPad, or the iGen generation. Okay, context is everything. This is the picture I distribute. I tell people I belong to the Ann Landers School of Photography, picture 10 years old and heavily photoshopped. I used to say that heavily airbrushed, but half people didn't know what I was talking about. I went to a conference, and before me was a comedian. And I learned the old vaudeville saying that your act should never follow either a comedian or a dog act. Well, this guy thought it would be great fun to pair up some of the principals at the conference with celebrities. And I drew this guy. And so I get up and I go, oh, gee, 35 years in the business and doing turnarounds and, sweltering in the panhandle, throwing pipe, and I shot in 15 seconds. I decided to try it again, and Google has a great thing called image search, where you can put up a picture and it'll search images. So I did it with that picture to see what I'd come up with. And I wasn't going to use it until I showed it to one of our co-ops, and he said, who's that? And think about it. It's been 8 years. Some of these kids, they were what, 10 years old, 11? They don't know who this guy is. For the first time in the history of the workplace, we have 5 generations all in the workplace right now. And I am not at the end of the curve. I've got some guys that are older than I am working out there. There's one guy I've known for almost 40 years. He's in his 90s and he's still working. But we're gonna talk mainly about the silence, and I throw what I call the greatest generation in there, the matures. I throw them in with the silence because there's very few of them left. But we will talk about them some. But you have the boomers, the Xers, the millennials, and the iGens. They're just starting to come in. So you can look at the 5 being either from greatest generation to millennials or silence to the iGens. But there's about 5, you can push the point and make it 6. Understanding the characteristics of these 5 groups will go a long way helping you retain people, develop people, and get the most that you can out of them. We have a lot of converging trends that are going on. Number one, people are living longer. You hear 60 is the new 50. More active lives. I have a picture of my father that was taken at the age I am now, and he looked like a broken down old man. He truly did. Healthcare wasn't the same, work conditions weren't the same, but he just looked old. I pray to goodness I don't look like that. I don't think so. But we're living longer and we're more active. I was just telling Rachel that I had cataract surgery about 2 months ago. It's great. 20/20 at 100 yards, 2600 right here. I had an upgrade. And between that and a bout of kidney stones, I kid my wife, who's my second wife, and I'm her second husband. I am husband 2.2. Okay. But if you're a good Christian, you understand we are getting a whole system upgrade in the future. Silents and baby boomers are not in a financial position to retire. Do you know that over 80% of the people in this country do not have $1,000 in the bank for emergencies? And many of them are thinking they're going to rely on Social Security for their retirement income. And as they get closer to it, they see they can't retire. Silents and boomers wanting to work till an older age, the work that they do defines them. Boomers are also supporting 2 other generations in many cases. They have their parents living with them, and a lot of times they have their kids. You ever hear the term boomerang children? Sometimes you have boomerang children, and sometimes they drag kids with them. You know, they have a whole comet tail behind them coming back to the house. And it's not necessarily their fault. You know, when I went to school, I had a minimum wage job. My wife had a minimum wage job. And we were both going to school. We each had a car. We had a house we rented. And we were doing okay. And when I left, I think I had a student loan of $2,000. You can't do that now. It's impossible. So a lot of these kids aren't financially able to be on their own until a later age. All this leads to more generations in the workforce. If you're able to understand, communicate, motivate, and train these people, the results are absolutely astounding. We have a personal success story in our company, which I'm extremely proud of. I'm proud of our folks. It's becoming a mission-critical skill no matter where you are. No matter if you're in consulting, manufacturing, government, this is becoming a critical issue because this wave is coming. You know, the older people are leaving. I had a comment made to me one time at work when I was pointing out some of the changes we're going to have in demographics. He says, you know, Steve, you can work as long as you want, as long as you're, productive. And I said, well, yeah, that's fine, but we got people dying. I mean, they're only going to work so long. It's not a new complaint, this generation gap. We've been talking about it for years. I have a quote from the Reader's Digest from 1932, bemoaning these younger kids that are coming into the workforce. Okay, let's talk about what defines a generation. Generally a 20-year span. Each generation is divided into cohorts, as we talked about. Each generation has a common shared experience. Now, some of them may look at it from different perspectives. Like in my case with Vietnam, I look at it from one way, my cousin looks at it from a different way. But we have shared events, trends, and technologies. Again, pointing to my cousin, we are completely different politically. We share the same core values. The differences come from methods. Time slips by. I heard this once on the radio, and being a good engineer, I had to prove this for myself. The time between Charles Lindbergh's flight and John Glenn's first space flight was 36 years. To go from John Glenn's first space flight to his second space flight was 35 years. It was about the same amount of time from Lindbergh's transatlantic crossing to John Glenn's space flight than between Glenn's 2 flights. Time tends to get away from us. And I find myself having to catch myself because in my generation, Vietnam was a defining moment. I used to talk about I was at Michigan and Balboa. And more as time went on, that reference just goes right past people and you get the glazed look on their face. They have no idea what Michigan and Balboa was. Some of us that are, I call chronologically seasoned, will know that was 68 Democratic Convention, whole world's watching, police riot. It was a defining moment for me, but people don't know it. It would be like my grandfather talking to me about World War I when I was 20 years old. we have our shared experience. For generations, we have different defining moments. We had Vietnam, segregation, the Clinton years, Challenger explosion, 9/11. I talk with some of my folks that are Xers, and they remember very clearly 9/11 and worrying about their kids. And I talk to Ys or millennials, and they remember being in school and the stress they had during 9/11. Trends that affects change, parenting styles. When I was growing up, we were kicked out the door in the morning, and when the street lights came on, you knew it was time to come home. And if you were doing something wrong, any parent on the block could smack you, and they wouldn't go to jail. The only thing we'd say is, please don't tell mom. Now we have what are called helicopter parents. They're always hovering, and they've done their kids a great disservice because their kids have become risk adverse. They're so used to always being watched, always being chaperoned, not being allowed to fail. They get out into the workplace, and it's a shock to them. I had one co-op student a few years ago, did a presentation, and it was okay. And I told him it was a good presentation given it being a learning experience for him and being a co-op student that hadn't presented before. I kid you not, I got a call that night at home from his mother. I did not praise her boy enough because, he spent hours at Google looking all up that information. How these kids are going to survive sometimes will make you wonder. Technology. You've seen these things on Facebook if you do Facebook about, what does a television set and a roll of aluminum foil have in common and all those types of things. A lot of us remember that. I remember watching the station logo at the end of the night. Couldn't wait until 6 o'clock in the morning on Saturdays to watch The Big Picture. That was the first show that came on TV. Reruns of Defense Department training films, and boy, we were glued to it. Celebrities, icons, and heroes. Some of us had heroes like John Wayne. That was a hero. To me, that was a hero. But then you had some of these other folks, Beavis and Butthead. Seriously? We all had our icons and heroes, and who we followed determined a lot of our attitudes. You see these kids running around with Che Guevara shirts on. I really wonder if they ever read about the man and what he did. Makes you wonder. Then conditions. We talked about that before. Children of the Depression versus kids today. Kids today do not know what adversity is. They have no idea. One of the things that I'm proud of or I'm glad for as a boomer, as being older, is you do put some things in perspective. Some of the things that went on in Ferguson and Baltimore, terrible things. But they don't know what trouble is. Folks my age remember seeing cities on fire. It kind of puts some things in perspective. So we have what we call the fabulous fives, the silents and some of the matures, boomers, Gen Xers, millennials, and the iGen. Some people call them next gen, they call them Z. I like iGen because they are the most connected group of people I've ever seen. And I've got a grandson that, it was a great cartoon. It was New Year's, and the kid is in front of his iPad. He's got one of those super iPads. So the first thing people say about it is, it's big. He's got one of those, and he's gaming. And it says 12 o'clock, and he throws up his hand, and he goes back to gaming. They are the most connected group of people I've ever seen. They also have a problem. They have a condition that's called digital dementia. And it's a real term. It's not a made-up term. What it means is people are so used to accessing the web for their information, they don't have to remember it because they know they can go back and find it again. Digital dementia. Nationwide in the workforce, about 5% of the workforce now are matures. Those include the greeters at Walmart. You have boomers, which are according to this study, they're the largest group, but that may not be true anymore. They're depending on who you talk to. Millennials or Gen Xers are now the largest group. And then you have the Gen Ys. We have iGens, but they're so small, they're just coming onto the workforce. We have one in our group. And, but they're just coming in. But in the next 5 to 10 years, you're really going to see an impact with those guys. I expect to hang around the workplace for another 8 years. So I'm going to see a lot more of these kids come in. What this translates to in a workplace is retention and hiring is going to become a real problem, because so many of the younger folks coming into the workplace now think about 3 years or so, I'm good, I'm going to get what I need, and off I go. Some of them think a year is too long. In this drive for immediate gratification, if they don't get promoted to CEO within 9 months, they're out of here. They're being held back. And it costs roughly $15,000 to $20,000 to replace these guys. It is not cheap. Not only the hiring cost, but the opportunity cost somebody loses by mentoring these people and bringing them up to speed and transferring some, of the knowledge and procedures in the organization to that new employee. Ergon is a really interesting company. I was told one time it's the best kept secret in town. When you look at the overall workforce breakdown at Ergon, we have 11% of us baby boomers, 30% are Gen Xers, about 60% millennials, and like I said, 1% Gen Zs. We have one or two guys that are just coming in. What you're actually seeing is a huge influx of people in the last 3 or 4 years of bringing folks in. When I started 3 years ago, or 30 years ago, we were a really small operation. Didn't know if we were going to make it. And some of us used to sit around and say, boy, I can't wait till we get big and we can hire some good help. Well, we finally got some good help, and we're hiring them now. In my particular group in systems engineering, 30% are boomers, 60% are Xers. Millennials are 10%, and we have a Gen Z with us. Our average tenure is 18 years. The newbie who I kid about getting coffee has been with the group for 9 years, and he just wishes we'd hire somebody else so we'd stop picking on the probie. This also presents a problem, though. Within 5 years or so, 60% of this department, they're going to be gone. Already talking about, where are the grandkids going to land? I want to be near my grandkids, or I want to do this, or I don't want to do that. These people are going to leave, and a lot of the information, a lot of the knowledge they have are leaving with them. And so that intellectual property, that transfer of information is getting to be more and more expensive and more critical. For so many years, so-and-so was the go-to guy on a particular problem. Well, if they're retired, what do you do? I like to use the FUD principle when I talk to some of my folks: fear, uncertainty, and doubt. So the bad news is going to come. The bad day is going to come when somebody's macro breaks, and they go to the person that does the macros, and that office is dark because they're gone and they've retired. Now what are we going to do? And I've been sounding the trumpet that we have got to do something. The matures, veterans of silence, they're 70 or so, maybe older. They were formed by the Great Depression, World War II. I remember growing up, my dad was a DI in the Patton's Army, and he used to inspect my bedroom like it was boot camp. I don't think he ever left the war, and many people were like that. A lot of people didn't leave the Depression behind them. They had heroes like Joe DiMaggio, FDR. FDR is an amazing person in many ways. There were people that grew up their whole life, they didn't know any president besides FDR. And the first time my father knew him or met him, he didn't know he was even in a wheelchair. It came as a shock. But John Wayne, Ella Fitzgerald, Count Basie, all those guys were their heroes. Seniors are punctual and they rarely miss work. These matures have this impression on them, put on by other people, that there are going to be attendance problems, they're always going to be sick. These are probably the most loyal persons that you're going to find in the workplace. They're used to working toward a common goal. Due to the FDR years, they have a huge faith in government, and they have a feeling that government is going to take care of them. They're not self-promoting, and they are always very concerned about saving money because they knew what it was like not to have it. Their primary trait is they're loyal. They're extremely loyal folks. Boomers, they're running from 47 to age 70, somewhere in there. You can see there was a bubble in the boomer generation, and the millennials are showing the same type of swelling of birth rates, which is encouraging because somebody's got to pay my Social Security. Some of the things that defined my generation was the Vietnam War, Watergate. I was telling some of the folks that my cousin, again, I call him my cousin brother, he has voted Democratic for years. The guy was a corporate attorney for Allstate Insurance, and he was a dyed-in-the-wool Democrat. And some of the things he would say, you'd have this cognitive dissonance of, I don't understand why you're voting this way and you think this way. And he said, Steve, it's because Nixon lied to me. Nixon said he had a secret plan to get us out of Vietnam, and 18 months later, I was in Da Nang. He said, and I vowed then and there I would never vote for a Republican again. We had 4 million sets when I was born in the country. By the time I was 7 or 8, we had 50 million TVs. We were the start of having the TV as the perennial babysitter. Some of our heroes, Martin Luther King. Some people had Richard Nixon for a hero, and in many ways, he deserves that. The Beatles, Leave It to Beaver. That was kind of at least the writer's snapshot of what home life was like when I was growing up. And then you had busing and again, segregation. I talked about how when you have attitudes within these cohorts I was talking about, you form most of your opinions between the ages of 12 and 14. That's kind of when your basic worldview coalesces. As you get older and circumstances may change, you'll change your attitude some, but by the time you're 45 or 50, they're pretty well set in stone unless there's something catastrophic that happens. The older you get, the more of a change you need to have your views change. And I say that for the reason that I have friends that had to get up and go to the back of the bus. And they were 12, 13, 14 years old when this happened. And it's naive to say, well, that's in the past. It's not like that anymore. Forget about it. You know, those attitudes have already been ingrained. And I took it a step further at one briefing I was at in out east. And you take it outside this country. And if you go to Pakistan and Iraq, the kids there love rainy, overcast days, miserable days. They love it because those are the days that drones can't fly. They live with that threat all the time. Whatever the worldview is, this is what this 12, 14-year-old sees. And it's naive for anyone to think that a nation can go in and build a few hospitals and build a few schools and everything's going to be fine and life will go on. Because those kids in 30, 40 years are going to be taking over the reins of power and they're going to remember those days. So what happens at that time frame in their life becomes very important. Us boomers, we saw flaws in the world and we tried to fix them. I remember going to the first Earth Day we had at Oklahoma State. And we didn't do much, but you know, there was this feeling there that we had to do something. After school, a lot of us turned that into being competitive and hardworking. You know, even what I call the hippies in my classes became very hardworking hippies. You know, one of them built a business, I found out last year, built it into the biggest button business in Chicago. They had a wider selection of buttons than anybody else in the city. Why buttons? I have no idea. We question our upbringing, and we're also seen as sacrificing our personal goals for work goals. And I can't tell you the number of people my age that go back and wish that they could have changed things when they were younger, because looking backward, they see the effects of their work life had on their families. I tell people the biggest blessing or the biggest curse you can have is having your words coming out of your kid's mouth. We're coming through a renaissance. Some people call it middle-aged crazies, maybe so. But we're looking at getting a life. That was one reason I went back to get a PhD. I always wanted to do it. You know, why not? And we're very optimistic folks. People ask me what the best time of my life was. I tell them tomorrow. I can't wait to see what tomorrow is going to bring. Our attitudes over the years, though, have changed in many ways. You know, this is how the panic baby boomer in the 1960s. And that's today. The Xers are 46 to 36. Divorce rate tripled within their lifetime. And the damage that does to families and society is just being felt. I have to admit, I fell prey to this in some of my attitudes where my wife and I were out and we saw a husband with 2 kids. And my wife said, I wonder what he's doing. And my first response was, well, it must be his weekend with the kids. Not he was giving mom a break or she was out shopping. It was his weekend with the kids. And the thing about the Xers, when boomers were growing up, we knew we could always go home. And mom and dad were always there. Xers, nah, not so much. They're a little more skeptical and they're a little more self-reliant because those family ties aren't there like they were for the boomer generation. Some of the life events for these guys was OJ, Madonna, Beavis and Butthead. Because they are kind of skeptical and they've learned that they may not have people they can really rely on, they become independent, they're resourceful, and they're very cautious. And they do believe that, like the poem Invictus, they're the master of their fate, that they can't rely on anyone but themselves. They have a faith in themselves and less faith in institutions as a whole. There was an interesting article that was written, and then about 20 years later there was a follow-up, but it was an article called Bowling Alone. It said that there were more bowlers in the United States than any time in the past, but there were fewer bowling leagues. People were bowling alone. And we see that trend. In my day, when I was younger, it was called cocooning. But you're seeing that same type of behavior now, only it's much more pronounced. And they really don't have any heroes. The 24-hour news cycle, that giant maw of just everything being thrown in to the churn to report something to fill airtime. If they don't find something good, they're going to find something bad. The shame about any election is that anyone that gets elected, by the time they're through the process and they're through the media, they're going to be a jerk, no matter who they are. And these kids grew up with that. They're very skeptical. Millennials, as I said, they're going to be the next baby boom generation. But for these guys, they had a technology explosion. Okay, they really started to see it come on. They were the recipients of the first iPods. Commercial level digital cameras you didn't have to spend $5,000 for. But they're also the kids that were involved with school shootings and lockdowns and seeing metal detectors show up in their schools. They're very technology aware. This poor kid, he was a late bloomer. He didn't start texting until he was 18 months old. When I did my PhD, I had a great picture of some Chinese kids who at the time were 2 years old and they were navigating iPads. I've got younger grandchildren now that, man, they can navigate an iPad. You have to take it away from them. Millennials' heroes were all these folks. And if I had the speaker's notes, I'd name them all to you, but I don't remember who half those folks are. So they take diversity for granted. In the oil industry, I have to admit, for years and years, the industry was mighty male and mighty white. Nowadays, if a millennial walks into a meeting with oil industry folks from 30, 40 years ago, they'd be extremely uncomfortable because they're used to seeing diversity. They've known mostly affluence, even if that came with borrowed money. They grew up in an affluent environment. They don't know what hardship is. They want to find meaningful work. And I got slapped in the face with this about, as I was reminded today, 15 years ago by one of my folks, that when they hired on as a web guy. And we like to cross-train people and give them more skills to make them more valuable, to get them more money. And we said, no, I'm a web guy. I'm not doing it. And I'll quit before I write programs. So we compromised after a year or so, and he writes programs, only he calls them scripts. So that's okay. Now, guy that was my age, he was the lab foreman, the shift foreman. He went refinery manager here in Vicksburg. He became refinery manager in West Virginia when we bought that property. Then he became the vice president of human resources. And now he's over our safety program. He is, like many of us, very loyal to the company, where millennials, and to a certain extent Xers, are loyal to their craft. You know, they want good, interesting work. They don't care about a lot of benefits and 401ks and Social Security and this type of thing, because especially with the Xers, they don't think it's going to be there anyway. But they want the work. They want fulfilling work, and they want a feeling that what they do makes a difference. They value information and they value technology. One guy that just didn't get it in my group that did leave, or he was in a military environment before he came to work for us, and he worked on the paradigm that information was power. So he would try to dole out information just little bits at a time, so people, you know, he would have this perceived power. And I try to explain to him, in today's workplace, that's not how you get to have power. You have power by being the go-to guy for giving information. If you try to withhold information, people just run around you and you'll end up isolated. It's a completely different paradigm. These guys are skeptical. That's what our newest employee looks like. I swear. Yeah. We were going out someplace, and we were celebrating, and I was going to take him out for a couple beers, and one of the guys said, I can't go with you. And I said, why? And he was one of the key guys that worked on putting in this new programming. He said, well, I can't drink. I had a woman work on our blending system, which is the refinery's cash register. We can make all the product if we want, but if it doesn't get blended in a truck and shipped off and we get paid, none of us get paid. This girl was younger than my oldest grandson. She had a multi-million-dollar project. It takes a little change in attitude. They like order and structure. They like to be engaged, and they do have a strong work ethic. You'd be amazed the number of emails I can send out at 10, 10:30, 11 o'clock at night and get an immediate response. Work and home just kind of blend together, but you also have to understand that they may watch a YouTube video at work, and you can't freak out about it. You know, they may come in at 8:05 instead of 8 o'clock. That's okay, because they stay until 7 o'clock at night. You have to learn not to be just so rule-bound. They can process information really quickly, so you have to, really throw things at them. And sometimes you do have to slow them down to explain. One thing I did find that's interesting, the iGens and the millennials both have one common trait, and I found it out in real world when I do pastor, and it was backed up in some Pew Research reports. You see these ads of a bunch of young kids getting together. Now, this was like advertisement for a church. A bunch of kids getting together, having fun and interacting and everything. Has very little effect on the folks. If they want friends, they can go to a bar. And it's the same thing in the workplace. They have work friends and they have friends. But, if they really want a social life like that, they can go to a bar. They're looking for mentors. I can't tell you how many times after work I've sat there and talked with a fella for an hour and a half, just talking. Because many of them come from broken families. Many of them don't have a father figure in their life. And many of them do look for mentors. They're also optimistic. They have a whole new lexicon. They weren't downloaded, they were born. And the kids complain when they don't have Wi-Fi at school. They have these rules now where kids can't have their phones in school. Well, you can have your phones, but you have to have them turned off. Can't leave them in your locker because they'll get stolen. That technology is something that's really integral to their life. So we have the I generations, or the iGens, millennials, Gen Xs, baby boomers, and the silence. Some of their behaviors. As we said, the matures, they're loyal to their employer. They have good interpersonal skills. They make great mentors, great mentors. I had to remember that me and a few other guys, we were the keepers of the stories. We were the ones that held the corporate values, or remember the corporate values, and it was our job to pass it on to the younger folks. And that's a big job for the older boomers and the matures, to make sure the values of your organization get passed on. Because for the newer employees in a company, they may not understand the values and philosophy of the company that got it to where it is today. Matures are also very willing to learn. They have a strong work ethic. As I said, they're punctual, they're willing to put in the hours, and they're willing to work hard. They also accept command and control management styles. They don't really have a problem with top-down type of management. For boomers, work comes first. We're loyal to the company, as I explained before. For the work ethic, they're willing to work long hours, they're willing to work hard, and they like to be observed while they're doing it. They believe in that work ethic so much that they champion it, and they evaluate others in that paradigm of how hard you work and how long you work. They focus on teamwork and relationship building. I mentioned to people that whenever you walk into a meeting, there are actually two agendas in the room. There's one agenda that's passed out at the beginning of the meeting, outlining the tasks at hand, but then there's also another agenda, and it deals with the relationship within the people in the group. If you're comfortable with the people in the group and you have a good relationship with them, you're much more likely to solve the problem. Because if you don't have a good, solid relationship with the people in the room, people get into posturing and taking a stand because of how it looks or because of how it sounds. And sometimes you will run around a solution to a problem instead of attacking a problem head on. Boomers also believe in working hard to advance and to put in their time. They do believe to a certain extent in the seniority system. If you've been here longer than somebody else, you ought to get the promotion. Gen Xers, on the other hand, their philosophy is to work to live, not live to work. They reject the boomers and the matures definition of a work ethic. To them, the work ethic is getting the job done fast and getting it done right. And they value talent and ability over longevity. They don't care how long somebody's with the company. They worry more about can they do the job and are they good at what they do. And they're also very loyal to a person, not a job or a company. There's another saying that holds true across generations, that people will hire into a company, but they quit a person. With millennials, the work has to be meaningful and it has to be fun. They want work that's results-oriented, where they can see the results of what they do. And they also like to have immediate awards. And awards don't necessarily have to be monetary again. It can be a thank you or just a recognition for a job well done. They're also loyal to the people they work with and play with. They're much more likely to socialize with their coworkers at the end of the day than boomers or seniors. They also believe that technology is a necessary part of their work environment. The iGens, they are hyper-connected, even more wired than the millennials. And the recommendations of their peers carry enormous weight. Now, their peers may just be someone they met through social media, somebody on a blog, a YouTube video that they've seen. Those types of inputs carry enormous weight with them. They're sensitive to environmental problems and related social issues as well. They're very careful. They came into an age of economic austerity, the 2008 market crash and some of the fallout from that. And so they're cautious with economic and career decisions. They share some very important values with matures in the silence. So in summary, for this section, you have the silence boomers, Gen X, Gen Ys, and Gen Zs, or the iGens. Some things that we didn't touch on were the learning styles. For the silence, they're used to traditional sources of learning. They like to read. If you want a mature or a silent to really understand something, you give them a book, you give them a procedure, you give them something written down on a piece of paper. For boomers, they like traditional learning as well, but they also like more of a participative learning, doing something with their hands, being able to reflect on it, question it, and get feedback from the person giving them the information. Gen Xers are very receptive to e-learning, to computer-based training. They're also very amenable to structured lectures. The millennials, they like to integrate technology and media. They like interactive things. They like to use simulations where it's possible. They do go to YouTube videos. They are very good at looking at things visually. You have to start to be careful with Gen Ys, though, because they grew up in the TV generation where you have a problem solved in a 1-hour program, where it's broken up into 10, 15-minute segments. They don't do quite as well when you sit them in a room for an hour at a time or an hour and a half and then give them a break. Gen Zs like to have their learning much more customized. That can be a challenge, but since they do adapt to it so well and they are so good at multitasking and absorbing knowledge, that it could pay off to look at more of that specialized training. For career planning, the silents, they're happy where they are. Boomers, they believe that their time in service and their dedication to a company should be rewarded. Gen Xers are a little bit more impatient. They say it's about time that I get a promotion. They're very ambitious in that regard. Gen Y see very much a cause and effect. I delivered the results, so I'm going to get promoted. Gen Zs are much more pragmatic. Say, I'm smart, I'll get a job, I need a job. And since they are more cautious, they're more concerned about their status within the company in terms of having a job than they are getting to the next promotion. Lastly, we want to talk about some intergenerational coordination. One thing to remember is by 2025, 75% of the workers globally will be millennials. That's where I say that for some boomers, especially the younger ones, they could very well end up working for their grandchildren. The matures, what they bring to the workplace, they bring in some great interpersonal skills and a great work ethic, as we've talked about. They may have some problems with diversity of the workforce. My attitude is that's their problem. Some may also struggle with the technology. In learning, there's a thing called a scaffolding theory, where you learn one skill or one concept by relating it to something else that you're more familiar with. And for some seniors, there's just a disconnect between the new technology and what they've experienced in the past. There is something called the digital divide. And this digital divide talks about how some of the seniors that can't grasp the new technology can get left behind, especially in the way of social services. Many of them want to go to a Social Security office to get information, and you don't do that anymore. You go to the web, and some seniors have that trouble adapting. They do make great mentors, though. That is one of the best things about matures and the older boomers. They make great mentors. They are the keepers of the stories. They are able to pass on the values, and they're a great resource about learning about what works in the past, how things relate to other things. They can put things in context, and they love to share that knowledge. If you haven't seen the movie The Intern, you ought to see it. It is a great movie talking about this particular concept. Robert De Niro is a guy that's retired, and he's been retired for a few years, and he's getting bored. He wants to do something. He wants to feel productive again. And so he signs on as an intern with this company that's run by Anne Hathaway's character. And the whole movie talks about he's mentoring her through a difficult part of the company's growth. And it's a great example of how matures and silence can be put to work. Boomers are driven, and they're service-oriented. And one thing I tell the folks in my group in systems engineering, I said, if we were called Magnolia Engineering Services, would our company hire us? I want our company to utilize our department because they want to, not because they have to. Boomers are also great team players. They work well with groups, and they work well in a collaborative environment. They do have problems sometimes dealing with conflict because they are so highly relationship oriented. They can have problems dealing with conflicts within the workplace. And we're also self-promoting. Sometimes we feel we're not appreciated the way we ought to be, so we like to kind of make sure people know what we've done and get positive feedback from them. Xers are very open to receiving feedback. They're not as defensive as boomers or seniors are, and they're good at networking. Okay? Networking is a little bit different than relationships. Networking is just going out to different places for different information. They may develop a great network in a virtual environment through social media, through LinkedIn, through blogs, through other sources of information. Some areas of conflict for them, some problem areas, is they do tend to be more nomadic. Even though that's what's said about them, I think that can be said about many people. Many boomers were the same way. Gen Xers are good also at parallel processing. They can kind of handle a couple of concepts at the same time, and they can work on different tasks almost simultaneously. About the boomers, what I like to say about the boomers and seniors, we don't parallel process, we're interrupt driven, which is also an older computer term.
Millennials are even better at multitasking. They grew up in a type of environment where they have multiple types of stimulation thrown at them from different directions, and they're developed a great way of being able to process all of that. They also appreciate diversity. They're the guys that if they would walk into a room of a oil company 20 years ago, they would be very uncomfortable. Some areas of conflict, though, as I've mentioned, they do have a strong parental attachment that comes from that symptom of being raised by helicopter parents. They also need more recognition. They need that positive reinforcement. I remember one instance with all of our co-ops. Before they leave, I like to take a selfie with them, and I put it up on Facebook for their friends and for some others. And one of the co-ops was almost ready to leave the building to go back to school for the next semester. And I said, oh, well, wait a minute. You know, I need to get a picture. And I got the picture of the two of us together. I got the selfie. You know, and he said, oh, man, that's great. I was wondering when my turn was going to come. To me, I didn't think it was that big a deal. I appreciated the picture with him, but I didn't attach the same importance to it that this particular millennial did. And it was a great lesson learned. iGens, they're even better at multitasking. You know, they do multitasking on steroids. They do very well with online collaboration. We're putting in some software now that encourages online collaboration, and I think they're going to take to it extremely well when their time comes. Again, these folks also have strong parental attachments. You have to recognize that in them. And they're also easily distracted. They're used to having a lot of stimulation thrown at them, and they're used to getting it in short bites. If you look at some of the podcasts and some of the learning media that comes out now, they're slicing it down into 5-minute chunks because they don't have the attention span that some of the other generations do. So what that means for a company, you know, your company is probably falling into 4 different areas. You have 4 different attitudes within a workplace. And one attitude is the generation of people at the very top are the only ones that matters, and the rest just need to grow up or shut up. Another type of attitude is the generational change is an emerging issue within an organization, but haven't done too much about it. Third attitude is that they view generational change as an emerging opportunity, and they look at it more as an opportunity than as a challenge. The fourth attitude is they see it as an opportunity, and they're taking active steps right now to take advantage of those opportunities. You know, they're changing the culture of their workplace to be able to utilize the advantages that come with this generational change. My challenge to you is, you know, what does it mean for the future of your workplace? And are you ready to embrace this change and use it to the betterment of the place where you work? So again, you can contact me at Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, email. Also, you can download this presentation in PDF format at tinyurl.com/ERIGen16. That's Ergon Refining Inc. Generations 2016. So I thank you for your attention, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.